What's going on, people in YouTube land? KimchiChris here, and welcome to today's brand new video where we are going to talk about and maybe try to attempt to review the brand new movie that's been blowing up your Facebook feed, your Instagram feed, your YouTube subscriptions, all over the internet if you're into rock and roll or 80s metal. We are talking about the brand new Motley Crue biopic, The Dirt. Now, of course, this movie is based on this book right here by the same name, the Motley Crue Dirt book, and this book is amazing. This is one of the best rock and roll autobiographies ever. The book was put together by all four of the guys in Motley Crue, along with a little bit of guidance from some extra writers as well, and it's a legendary book. There's some things talked about in there that shouldn't be talked about. There's some crazy things. It's everything you would think about when you think about Motley Crue and the whole sex, drugs, and rock and roll thing. It's rolled up into a book, one disgusting book, and it's awesome. It's one great ride of a book. But can the movie deliver on that premise? Now, my biggest thing going into this movie is that there's some things in this book you just can't do in a movie, or it's gonna be a porn. Let's just be fair here. I mean, like the scene where they're all in the hot tub and Tommy's girl does, you know, that thing to him. I'm trying to keep this as G-rated as possible when talking about this book, and then he commands her to do that same thing to all the other guys in the hot tub. I was thinking, man, if they do that scene, it's just gonna be crazy. So I wasn't sure how they were gonna do some of the most interesting parts of the book on the, you know, actual movie. And I wasn't wrong. They left out a lot of stuff. I mean, they opened with the scene of the girl with the just explosion from an area. This is so hard to talk about while trying to keep this somewhat clean, but if you've seen the movie, you know what I'm talking about. If you've seen the book, maybe you understand what I'm talking about. I don't know. That being said, keeping this close to its source material as well as, you know, something you can actually put on Netflix was going to be a challenge for anybody, and I do think they delivered. Spoiler alert, I enjoyed this movie. I know there's some people out there that hate it, and then there's some people that think it's a masterpiece. I'm somewhere in the middle. I think it's an enjoyable movie, but, you know, it's not the greatest thing that's ever existed, but I did enjoy it. I think they did a good job at portraying a band that was just like out of control and crazy, you know, really just showing again all those sex, drugs, and rock and roll. And again, there's a lot of that in this movie. If you're not a fan of that stuff, I don't know how you're into Motley Crue anyways, but you probably shouldn't check this movie out. But if you are into at least seeing that on film, it does show, you know, some of the crash and burn effects of drugs and all this crazy lifestyle stuff, what it can really do to a person and a band and even a business at the end of the day. I mean, this movie, while it has some extreme highs for the band, it also has some extreme lows, and it really shows you both sides of the picture here pretty well. And I think it's cool that a lot of these biopics are coming out and hopefully introducing the original music to a new generation. I mean, I'm sure there's some people out there that this will be their first exposure to Motley Crue, and they'll say, hey mom, hey dad, hey big brother, hey whoever, I love some of those songs. What is this? What is this band? Or they'll just go to Spotify and listen to it. Either way, hopefully, they will listen to some stuff like Shout at the Devil and continue to spread the awesome Motley Crue music that we've all loved for years and years and years ourselves. Now, while this is an extremely enjoyable movie, there are, of course, some negatives and some things that they could have done a little bit differently. They, of course, jumped around the timeline a little bit. Some things were inaccurate, all that fun stuff. That happens with every biopic, so I'm not even going to really concentrate on that too much. But one thing that did bother me a little bit, they really concentrated on Nicky more than anyone. And he's the only one that got a backstory and all these other things, and I kind of thought this would happen going into it considering it is Nikki Sixx's band, but it's still kind of bothersome. I mean, they really didn't do much with Mick Mars, if you ask me. He almost seemed like a bit player in the background, and he's my favorite member of the band, so leaving his story out, or at least in less detail, it just seems silly. I mean, they didn't even seem to address his alcoholism and things like they did the other members of the band outside of him having a bottle of vodka with him in pretty much every scene. And as much as I love Mick Mars, I think it was kind of ridiculous they had to throw in a scene of him saying, well, I don't like Kiss when they're meeting Doc McGee. I mean, that's one of the parts that's inaccurate about the movie because Doc talks about how he managed Kiss when he was meeting Motley Crue, but he didn't manage Kiss till the mid-90s. I think that was just thrown in there just so Mick's character could say, yeah, they suck. So that seemed a little bit silly, but you know, again, this thing jumps back and forth. It's not completely accurate. It's there to be an entertainment piece more than an education piece. Another small gripe I have is I didn't like how they portrayed John Corabi for the like 2 seconds he was in there. He didn't even get any words, and he just seemed like a smiling buffoon that seemed happy to be in Motley Crue. And that's just not correct. I mean, I know he came in during the most unsuccessful time of the band, but when you lost a singer and you were going into grunge as a hair metal band, you weren't going to be successful. If they had just given him 2 lines or made him seem like less of a silly guy. I mean, John Corabi's awesome. They really should have done something else with that. I mean, they could have just had him in there portraying himself, honestly. He's one of the few guys that actually looks like what he looked like back then, so why not? And on that note, working backwards here to something else that's positive, I loved the quick scene with David Lee Roth. I don't want to spoil it too much if you haven't seen it yet, but he's in there for a second. It's funny. It's a great moment. David Lee Roth, even when it's someone acting as him, is just an enhancement to any scene or any part of life. David Lee Roth is ridiculous, and it's great he's in there for a second. Similar to the Ozzy scene. We all know the Ozzy scene. It's in there in its entirety. It's changed up a little bit from the book, so it's not completely accurate, but that scene is pretty great, pretty priceless. I definitely had a chuckle at that. The guy that portrays Ozzy does a pretty good job. But going back to the negatives for a second, and I'm sorry I keep going back and forth, but that's kind of how the movie is because it doesn't really carry the time frame exactly right. But one more negative that I do want to spotlight is I think it's kind of weird that they left out some of the really important parts of the Crue's history and they kind of diminished some parts. I don't know. I mean, like, for example, Pamela, not even there. Not even there. Now, maybe she didn't want to be in the movie, and that could be the reason she's not there because, you know, that seems like that could be a sticky situation, but not even there. And when they get back together, it kind of just fast forwards to them ending. It doesn't really talk anything much about the reunion. It just seems kind of weird. It seems like they worked out a really good movie that concentrated on their golden years, so to speak, and then they kind of wanted to get to the end and include it, but didn't want to allot any time for it. Now, of course, to actually have everything included, this would have had to have been a much longer production, a miniseries perhaps, or like a 4-hour movie. So I will forgive them a little bit on that, but it did seem a little bit lacking to just like have the end of the band summarized in like 5 seconds, basically. Now, there's a lot of history there. That's why a movie like the NWA Straight Outta Compton works so well. Is extremely long, but the band really had a kind of short history when you really think about it. So that one worked well with that. This band just had a little too much going on to put it all into an hour and 45 minutes, but other than leaving out the last, you know, half of their career into a 5-minute thing, they did a good job summarizing it all together. And my last gripe, and it's kind of a small one, is that the actors, they did a good job. That's not the gripe. They did a pretty good job, but I feel that the characters, you know, of Vince, Nikki, Tommy, Mick, they didn't have enough individual personality. They kind of all melded together and even visually the same because Tommy and Nikki in particular kind of looked like the same person at times, and that was kind of weird, but that's a small gripe. I mean, they're not going to get everything perfect, and if you couldn't tell from this review so far, I enjoyed this movie and I would recommend anybody checking it out. As long as you're into rock and roll and especially 80s rock, and if you come in with a prior knowledge of the band, it's a lot easier to follow. I don't know if I would have really known exactly what was going on if I didn't already know the history of the band, but it's a really good snapshot and hopefully you'll get some people to want to read the book and check out the band some more because the book's awesome, the band's awesome, everything's great about Motley Crue except, you know, things like that, like a Virgin cover that they released kind of recently, not the biggest highlight of their career. But at the end of the day, the movie is free if you have a Netflix subscription, of course, so check it out. It's not going to cost you a dime, and even if you hate it, all you wasted was your time. But for those of you that have watched it, what did you think? Did you think it was awesome? Did you think it was terrible? Or are you somewhere in the middle thinking it was pretty entertaining, like myself, but not a masterpiece, like Purple Rain? That's a masterpiece if ever I saw one. Let me know in the comments below what you guys have thought about this so far. Give this video a thumbs up if you enjoyed it, and hit that subscription button if you're new around here and want to see some more KimchiChris content. I'm always putting up music and rock and roll and metal and all kinds of cool coverage, lots of Kiss stuff, and it seems some Motley Crue stuff recently, so let's see what else we can get out there. Thank you guys so very much for watching this video, and I will see you guys on the next video.